Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Bruski Breakdown Live, a fantasy NBA weekly big story show with yours truly. I don't know if any of this is working. I have no real idea. I do thank the great Dan Vesperis and all of our crew for helping to put this together. I gotta say we're winging it. We'll do our best. We'll keep improving as we go here, but it's been kind of a cool month. I've had some recovery in my repetitive stress injury, which has kept me from being able to type. Yes, Dan, I will yell at people to like and subscribe the show. That's one way to get somebody to do these things, is to just all caps text them in the middle of their open that it would be great if you guys could like and subscribe to the show or the channel. I guess it's the channel, it's the show. I don't know. You know what? We're doing YouTube big right now, and you're seeing that around the internet at large. It's too much to rely on any one platform right now. We don't need to get into the reasons why. So I think we all know the reasons why, but for me, this month has been something of an end of a really long road of about 3 years, legit 3 years, not being able to type, which, if you're a writer, that's kind of a big deal. And it's slowed my productivity to 20% of what it normally is. I've always been able to keep fantasy and basketball sort of tucked into that 20% that I can do. And so I really don't feel like I've missed anything there, but being able to actually put the content out, have the bandwidth to do these kinds of things, that's just brand new. And even this last week, I did about 2,000 words on a Bruski Breakdown that you guys saw here on Twitter. First in Discord, by the way. That's one way that we're incentivizing our supporters to be supporters, is to make sure that you guys get the intel first. So that was 2,000 words there. I did about 2,000 words on the Kings, because of course I did. And another 2,000 words the next day after that, which I hadn't been doing like 100 words, very often. I've been relying on dictation to get through these last 3 years. And the problem actually was there 2 years before that. I didn't even know what was going on for 2 years. My shoulders would go numb, my arms would go numb. And I just, like the dummy I am, I was just pushing through it and learned a lot about not doing that. That's not very healthy. This month we've been celebrating, there's about 5 professionals here locally that are really good at their job, like kind of known nationally, a couple of them for what they do. And it just, there were so many times it didn't seem like we were going to come out of this thing. And everybody just sort of, kept us collectively, with our heads up, trying to stay positive, getting through all of it. There's too many people to shout out, and it's really not worth our time here at 3:50 p.m. lineup lock. When we get some of this tech down and the production of the show down, I do want to do some breaking news stuff. It'll help our DFS users. It'll help everybody who's in daily leagues and games cap format and all that good stuff. So we'll try to do that more often. Wednesday's a busy day, so we should have quite a bit of that. Looking at a 3:30 start time for this show is kind of what we're angling around. That could change. Things come up, meetings come up, but 3:30 is what we're aiming for. And we're going to take on bigger topics. There will be some time toward the ends of these shows for chat. Not going to lie. I'm looking at the chat and all this stuff and how this stuff goes, and I don't quite know how to do it. So Dan, in his infinite wisdom and his execution, is actually pushing the buttons for me today. But I believe he's actually off getting dressed right now, is what he's doing. So I don't see comments and I don't see chat. But if you do have questions for us, send them in, and Dan will be putting them up on screen at some point in time. We're going to cover a lot of injury stuff in this show here. There's been a lot of good news lately, which I'm not going to lie, I felt targeted there for the longest time. We've got guys that are super young with no injury history getting dinged and really taking what would have been cash in our pockets. It's a guaranteed profit that you just live on all year, taking that out of our hands and put that into, I guess, the basketball gods' pockets. And they're going to have to give us a refund at some point in time. But we got Chris Paul coming back, Chris Middleton coming back, Isaac came back, Jonathan Isaac, that is. Brandon Ingram probably coming back. Steven Adams just went out. So that's sort of that actually is a miswrite on my part. This isn't in the good news coming back department, but I definitely want to talk about that a little bit. Anthony Davis coming back, and really a who's who list of players we're trying to figure out when they will come back. KD, Cat, Zion, Booker, Vassell, Kristaps. So we got no shortage of names. And I have said it on Twitter. I don't know if this year's more injury stricken than years past, but it sure feels that way. It's hit a lot of our players, so that's been a bummer. And I look across standings in our various high stakes leagues, and I go, man, this is not how it normally ends. There's guys that finish in the top 5 every year, and they're at the bottom of the standings. And I got teams that are doing really good despite injuries, and then I got teams that have just been clubbed over the head. And some of them, I look at them and I go, do I even want to drop a player here? And the answer is no. And then I go a little bit further. I go, outside of like 1 or 2 guys, and then we're gonna actually hit on with the situation in Indy, but like outside of a couple of guys, these are like top 50 guys. I'm not ready to count these teams performing poorly at the halfway point or a little bit past it. I'm not willing to count them out, even though the inside of me is like, I don't think these teams have a chance. But then I look at the lineups and I go, wow, you could have an all top 50 team here. And I have had some late season comebacks in those kinds of situations in the past. So I'm not ready to rule any team out. So we've got good teams and bad teams is kind of the statement there. And just a lot of injuries. So let's go through some injury stuff here. Let's get your questions in. Like and subscribe. Dan Besbris, that's 3 times this show. I did that. And let's get to it. So Chris Paul back Sunday. I actually this almost flew past my radar because you just assume Chris Paul is going to be hurt at some point in time during the year at his age. And with the the Suns theoretically not needing to play for the regular season, though the standings would say otherwise at this point, you just kind of like, he's going to come back. And, the bottom of the rotation with Dwayne Washington Jr., who, by the way, I got to say, I feel bad passing on him in 30 deep. Knowing what we saw in Indy and other stops, he's got actual pop to his game. And it's not that surprising that he did well when he had the opportunity. But you really just knew what that was. Cameron Payne's out. All those stats are going to filter down to guys like he and Damian Lee. Chris Paul coming back, that's not going to happen anymore. Cameron Johnson coming back, thank you. That's another guy. Cam Johnson going criminally late in drafts. It was a gimme that he was going to be this productive. Doing quite fine, I think, in 3 return games. So Cam Johnson is back. And so that team's really just sort of normalized. And we'll see, more of that when Devin Booker gets back. I'm not looking at anybody down chain or downstream in that team for any sort of fantasy value going forward. Good to see Chris Paul back, and it'll be interesting to see what teams like Phoenix and LA, as they're getting guys back, what do they do in the standings chase? The West, I wouldn't say it's as good as we've seen in years past. It feels like there's not quite as much talent as there's been in years past, but like the Eastern Conference and like the NBA at large, really the trend line is that there's so much talent in the league now that, the bottom, the guys that are looking to tank actually have talent. And that hasn't always been the case in the past. Seeing what these teams that are sort of blue chip teams, not the Lakers, but like the Phoenixes of the world, see what they do as they get healthy to displace some of the teams above them. That's going to be interesting from a reality perspective. So Chris Paul back. I think Jonathan Isaac is fascinating. Just question of what he can be. So watching his G League games, you want to take those games with a little bit of a grain of salt because, the competition isn't as good as the NBA, obviously. And at the same time, you were watching him and saying, man, he's got a lot of snap, the being gone so long. My first impression was that he really leaned out and got thin. So that's helpful for a few things. If you're dealing with knee issues and you're trying to stay on the court long term, you're a younger player and you're looking at the long term here. How can you do that? One way is to get really lean, so there's not as much pressure on the joints. So I think that's what he's done, even though he's been a thin player his whole career. I did think he was building some muscle there right before he got hurt. How does that work? How does that translate? I don't know. Maybe they play some 3 big lineups more in Orlando. And I think we're going to talk about Orlando during the trade deadline stuff. So I might save some of the bowl specific stuff. I know a lot of people have bowl questions. I might save that and just sort of focus on Jonathan Isaac right now. Isaac, offensively, he had snap. He had a turnaround jumper, a timing play, a timing action that in his first game back, he was nailing. So he's clearly done a lot of work in the gym. How much of this long, arduous, controversial, even, time off, it's just a fascinating story. He's definitely received a lot of support locally from his peers. So some of the questions that might have popped up a year or two ago about his off-court affiliations, I don't really think that they're even in play at all. Though if this was 2 years ago, I would definitely be asking, how is he being received in the locker room? Doesn't seem like we're seeing any issues there. But physically, definitely all the way back to like a reasonable range of where he used to be, within at least 20%, if not within 10% of what he used to be physically. Now he's doing this in small spurts, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. They're going to keep upping that slowly, back to backs. Definitely a question. This team has 4 bigs right now that they play. That provides a certain amount of not just cover for time off, but almost like a need for time off. So do they make this a nightmare for fantasy GMs in the days off category? That I'm going to say probably yes. So if you're in a daily format where you can just update as necessary, that is going to be, I think, where your sweet spot is for Jonathan Isaac. That's kind of obvious stuff, I know. But it's going to impact the entire rotation. I think I want to get into that when we talk trade deadline stuff, because that could turn into the Orlando Magic Hour pretty quick here at the top. But Isaac, like, what can he be? This is pretty phenomenal. Like, a guy with his injury history and his time off probably shouldn't be as explosive as he is right now. But, he is a bit of a unicorn physically. Leaning out was a good decision. He might fly around and get you top 100 value in, say, 18 minutes per game, where they say, hey, Jonathan, if you're going to go play 18 minutes a game, we want you to be super impactful. We're going to get you the ball a bunch, run around, jump for steals and blocks, because, hey, you're not going to foul out. And we know that you're going to take a day off in the next game. So just leave it all out on the floor within reason. And you see some super good per minute stats there. So Jonathan Isaac returning is great. Chris Middleton, there's part of me, obviously you see me and Dan tweet about this all the time, but it's been a frustrating thing because the news operation in Milwaukee, A, wasn't able to uncover it, and B, I don't think Milwaukee was going to let them uncover it. The plan for Chris Middleton was to sit basically the first third of the year. Then the bad luck with the knee injury, and here we are. And it's really just a question of how bad is the knee injury? We just don't know. Is this a thing where it's sort of a chronic knee injury and they're trying to, play this out and see, can he survive without surgery, of some type? That's what's going on in the back of my head as I'm frustrated with one squad that's got Chris Middleton on it, or maybe 2, but one important squad that's got Chris Middleton on it. That's what's banging through my head. If he dodges all of that, we know what he is. So there's no questions there. I think the biggest question I have in Milwaukee, other than about Giannis in general, his viability as a fantasy asset, is what's up with Brook Lopez. It's been such a magical season for him. He's carrying teams that took him, like 190, something like that. Really just showing his real life NBA value by being a good rim protector, moving his feet well, knowing where he needs to stand, and providing really an unstoppable 3-point shot. You can't block it. So all you can do is bother it. And, there's ways to defend it, but the thing that provides for that Milwaukee offense is so dynamic. So can he keep that pace is my top question in Milwaukee. I think in my Bruski breakdown, I said, hey, it's time to sell. But with Bobby Portis going down, I don't know if they can afford not to have his offense on the floor, because Bobby, of course, shoots threes. Different functions, different players, but now you have a decrease in volume. Maybe Chris Middleton can, and the thinking behind the Lopez drop was that, or not drop, pardon me, sell high was, Middleton's going to come back. This team's going to normalize a little bit. They're going to get ready for the finals, and they don't need Brook going off the way that he's been going off. But now, take one guy out, and maybe he survives. So I'm going to soften my sell sell now or sell high on Brook Lopez, and hopefully Middleton stays healthy. That's a really good team in Milwaukee that I want to see battling with the other teams down the stretch. And of course, I'm interested for my fantasy leagues. Brandon Ingram, even more frustrating than Chris Middleton somehow, because that's about as frustrating as it gets, is a high value player that you don't get to play and you get no updates on and nothing makes sense and it's total pain in the butt and you're losing because of it. Brandon Ingram has upped the ante because he's out there warming up every game. And you get this article out of NOLA.com. I forget the author, journalist that came up with this, but he sourced that internally within the New Orleans Pelicans that they're frustrated with his return time. Other players that were money in the bank for us, Desmond Bane, returned a lot faster. Yes, every injury is different. That's totally a given. Really, the only people who know the answer to this question are Brandon Ingram, the trainers, a few key people that may or may not have been sources for this story. But that kind of story actually doesn't go out in the local paper without there being a high likelihood that there is something to it. And that, I think, is an interesting subplot for this team, as you have a superstar in Zion who has had so much injury stuff that it's, you can do an entire show on it. How he gets handled, you wonder if Brandon Ingram says, I would also like to preserve my career by taking time off. And what are we all doing here? The thing about what's going on with injuries, like in Clipperland with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, people think you can just turn on the switch at the end of April. And there are teams that can do that, championship quality teams that, you think of those great Lakers teams that totally flipped the switch on and did not care about the regular season, that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's possible. But the downside of this is everybody else in that locker room, whether they say it or not, whether they completely understand that, yes, Kawhi Leonard is a premium player with bad knees and he needs to preserve himself. We need Paul George healthy in the playoffs. They completely understand this stuff. But then when it comes to their nagging injuries, they're like, oh, I would love to not push through this injury too. Or what happens when I'm Norm Powell? I think it was like Charles Barkley or Kenny Smith that brought this up on TNT. It's like, I get 3 shots one night, 20 shots the next. How do I prepare for that? This stuff is, cancerous at times for teams. What's going on in New Orleans, sort of behind the scenes, that a story like that would come out in the local paper. Usually local papers are pretty loyal, to the home team, to the extent that they're not going to print something that's just flat out false, without, they're just not going to print something that's flat out false. So there should be some degree of truth to the frustration, Brandon Ingram's timeline. I from our perspective, let's bring it back into fantasy here. He's the same risk that he always was. He landed on a lot of our teams because he was falling to like 65, 70. This is a potential all NBA first team player at some point in his career. There's a lot of elbowing around the league to get that actual first team nod, but he's that good, and in fantasy leagues, if he's healthy, he could be a top 20 guy, easy, So you take the plunge at 70 to get a Brandon Ingram, even looking at his games played history where you go, this should have been expected. You go, I can't find that kind of upside in that round. So I'll take a shot. And obviously you take a shot. Sometimes you hit, sometimes you miss. That's the way it goes. But with Brandon Ingram, he is going to be very protective of that toe. We probably will get indications pretty early on. That's the good news of the first couple of weeks, how things are going. And if he gets through the next couple of weeks and they put the kid gloves on and then they take the kid gloves off, get into the All-Star break, get an additional week of rest. I cross my fingers. I would think that he's sort of off to the races at that point. But again, it's Brandon Ingram we're talking about here. I think you could probably buy low here because of all of that. But it's, again, you're sort of taking risk on distressed assets, one way or another. But he's back, and that's going to make Trey Murphy very, very risky using going forward. I think you got to see it out. I think you got to see him suck for a week before you turn the page there. Zion, when he returns, that's another mouth to feed. No joke intended there, though I just made it. Circling the wagons on that joke. I just couldn't let it go. But that is, two high-profile scorers that's going to make Murphy expendable in fantasy leagues if they stay on the floor. If Herb Jones, who's so good, it's so unlucky that he's been hit like this. The lack of momentum in his game, and then what's been so promising, and I think there's buy low opportunity in this. It's been so promising that despite something most players would struggle with is the injuries he's had and the back and forth into the lineup. Like most players would struggle with that. But in those games that he either has struggled or has been returning, he's still putting up Herb Jones stats. There hasn't been this massive expansion of his game, which would be obviously great. And we would be talking about early round value at that point. But he's still plugging along, getting you 3 steals in a game, shooting to, 3-pointers and making enough of them to make that part of the equation good. But just being a non-negative in, free throw shooting, field goal percentage, things like that. The game really pops, and there's any step forward taken by him whatsoever. And I think there's talent for that. He's a monster in the waiting, and people are practically, leaving him for dead on the waiver wire right now. I think that's a great buy low opportunity. I think his game is strong enough to where he elbows people out of the way and not the other way around. And again, with a lot of talent on the team and him already having been dinged with injuries, he's a guy that doesn't want to take any more time off. And I doubt New Orleans wants him to take any more time off because they want his game to expand. There might be time for other players to rest some of their injuries. Looking at older players like CJ McCollum comes to mind at first. But New Orleans, I love that team. I'm glad I have futures on them. They're really fun to watch. Let's pivot to Los Angeles. Anthony Davis is back basically now. I haven't looked at the most recent news, so that might have been updated. He was a monster this before getting hurt. And it was kind of tough to reconcile with the fact that he looked so slow on the basketball court. So I think there's some dissonance between the stats and the level of defense that he's playing, but who cares in fantasy leagues? That's just money in the bank. If they continue to take that approach, his style of play, which is to kind of get as many steals and blocks as he can, that's great. That's phenomenal. You'll see the pendulum swing a little bit, and LeBron James GMs, unfortunately, I'm one of them in one league that's very high stakes and I'm doing very well in. I'm a little sad because I know once he breaks Kareem's record, he's probably really happy to defer to AD. And let AD carry some weight as long as he can physically do that. So that's one thing that's going on. You're going to see that pendulum swing in Los Angeles. The other is Rui Hachimura. Great acquisition for Los Angeles. I mean, they're going to get killed for not surrounding LeBron James with a talent. Their situation with the cap and their assets is so bad. Eking out little small wins like this, I think, is actually really smart for them. Rui has always sort of either been hit by bad luck or has been misused by a bad franchise, sorry, Wizards fans, in the Washington Wizards. So I'm excited just to see him in that environment. Now, fantasy-wise, he has holes in his game, and that's been one of the things that's held him back. There's been times when I've wanted to jump on the train just for the scoring, and it gives you no margin for error when you're looking to just get the buckets from him. The defensive stats aren't there. There are the outlines of a strong 3-point shooting game, so maybe that can be a boost to his value. It's the kind of thing, if you have a roster spot and you want to see if you can catch lightning in a bottle, or not even lightning, just like a drop of rain in the bottle, something like late round value, top 125, top 150, there could be that there. A LeBron James team with Anthony Davis, but any LeBron James team is really subject to his will, how he wants to bend the game. And you see a lot of oscillation in the stats from the players around him as a result of that. If LeBron wants to go out and put up 49, he's going to put up 49, and everybody else is going to have to sit and wait. What else we got? I think that's it for our injured stars, at least the ones that are back. We're going to play some pin the tail on the donkey here with some big names, some of which I think some of this is pretty obvious. KD came out and he said that he wanted to play in the All-Star game. That's great. We have him everywhere. He was our consensus, not consensus, but like he was the strong number 2 behind Nikola Jokic this year, in my opinion. So unfortunately, I have him everywhere. Fortunately and unfortunately right now. But, after seeing it and knowing the All-Star break was right around the corner, I just sort of in my head said, you know what, he's going to wait until the All-Star break. And I thought to myself, I think he wants to play. So it's not surprising that he would come back early. Hopefully he's doing the right thing. But so far, he's had a pretty good track record with his injuries and staying healthy. So that's going to be great. And it will take the air out of the balloon in Brooklyn for any of those peripheral players that we've been looking at during his absence. Cat is the big name. Cat doesn't seem happy. And I don't know how much of this is on Cat, how much of this is on the Minnesota Timberwolves, the new owners that drove the trade to do I like Kessler better than Gobert? I was just about to say that. I honestly, I mean, contracts and costs and first round draft picks aside, would I take Kessler over Gobert for a game today? Maybe. Rudy has been slow for a while, and he gets away with it with the long arms and the long reach. And I just wonder if the body is now all the way broke down. And I've been fading Rudy for about 4 years. It's worked about half the time in fantasy leagues. That trade was terrible. I think everybody knew it was terrible. A lot of folks wanted to try to make it work in their heads. You could tell that Minnesota wanted to make it work in their heads. Hearing comments, I got a good NBA radio, hour-long discussion out of Minnesota during the preseason about making it work. It just so sounded like people were trying to talk themselves into something that was never going to work. How does that implosion look? I don't know. I guess it's a long-term question, but does Cat want to risk further injury to come back and play with this team is sort of the question that's on my mind. And he's pushed back a little bit on a return date. And I just wonder how happy or unhappy was he? Everybody's going to say and do the right things, but you bring in that guy to play your position, and sure, it frees you up to do a lot of power forward stuff that a lot of bigs like to do, especially at Karl Anthony Towns, but you're losing or you're not winning as much as you should, and now the pressure of the moment, which we saw on Cat in the playoffs last year when he didn't answer the bell. He wasn't in the game mentally, made a lot of bad plays, got exposed on many levels, not just during the playoffs, but pretty much the last couple of years as a player that doesn't quite get it. Coming to grips with all of that, with Rudy Gobert at your side and a lot of pressure now to perform, I wonder what that looks like inside the walls in Minnesota, when especially you have an Anthony Edwards that is the best player on the team, bar none. And it hasn't really been handed to him. And I think it's actually being handed to him right now. It should have been handed to him in the playoffs last year, but it wasn't because of Cat's stature, because of the organization's commitment to Cat. And when they were in the most dire moments, it was Anthony Edwards that was bailing them out. And he is not shy, and he is probably putting his foot down on the gas pedal, both internally, just in general. And he's even made comments after games, that are pretty exposing of the weaknesses with some teammates there. So it's just going to be messy in Minnesota. And Naz Reid, if you're looking for some fruit here, Naz Reid, even though he's had trouble staying on the floor, and this isn't just like this year trouble, he's just a generally kind of banged up player. He's had trouble with the back injury staying on the floor. Statistically, we've been talking about Naz Reid for 2 years now, not always panning out for us, but we've seen enough games. Yes, he's had a couple where he's had to leave or the back injury has affected him and the games have been duds. If you bundle it all up, I don't think Rudy Gobert can stay healthy. I don't think Cat can stay healthy. And I don't think Naz Reid can stay healthy, but he's the one you can pick up on a waiver wire. He's the one that, if he's on a roster right now, maybe that GM is thinking, oh, the Naz Reid show is over. I can't sit here and tell you he's going to stay healthy, but I can tell you in 20 minutes per game, he can provide you late round value and it only gets better from there. So if things turn south, if Cat doesn't return, if Rudy Gobert stays injured, and he's the one actually that will probably try to fight through things because he knows how much is on the line for himself as well and what was traded to get him. But as you're seeing with the various injuries that he's had, it's, at some point he might even tap out because he also has to think about viability long term. Because if you get injured now, you're going to be even slower than you are right now. So Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid, Cat. Cat, though, so interesting because 3 years ago, I believe he won the poll. If you wanted to start a franchise, GM said, reality GM said, it would be that guy. And we didn't agree with that at the time, but that's what was said. Zion, I think maybe he wants to try to get involved with some all-star festivities, but I'm not sure he makes the team right now. I haven't looked at fan voting because, it's kind of irrelevant. We'll find out when we find out. I'm not following if he's 8th, 9th, 10th, if he's on the list, if he's voting and getting voted in. I don't think he's getting voted in. But will he get voted in by the coaches, which is what matters? I don't know, but I would say it's pretty smart for them to not play him during the All-Star break or prior to that. So I would look at the All-Star break after that for him to get ramped back up. We got Booker. I think Booker probably also gets held out to the other side of the All-Star break. I think with these mid-body injuries, and he's had a bunch of them, I don't see any reason for them to push those chips in the middle before the break. Kristaps, kind of the same thing. I mean, we're getting to that point where it really isn't smart to not take the extra week of the All-Star break and get these guys healthy. So Kristaps, and maybe what's the saying? The rose is falling off the bloom, the bloom's falling off the rose. I don't know what that saying is, but maybe the thing is falling off the thing. I don't know. And that would be super interesting because Washington has some interesting players downstream, one of which is a two-way player, Goodwin. So for you guys watching, I haven't really said much about him. This is probably the first time I've said something either on Twitter or in a show, but I think if they can get him signed for the rest of the year and he's not on that games limit that the two-way contract has in place, I think he could have an interesting stretch, but they're going to probably be out of contention, I would think. So Kristaps at a little bit of risk there. Vassell is probably the most interesting one. I took a shot there. Listened to a San Antonio podcast telling me how stupid I was for doing so, that he might not play, much this year. Maybe that's right. But maybe they just want him to develop. Maybe after the All-Star break, a week or two in, you could see him come back. Would they manage his games? Yeah, but this is a guy providing top 60 value, so he's worth paying attention to. If you have an IR slot, obviously. If you have extra space, though, take a shot before it becomes obvious. Before in a fab league, he's going to cost you an arm and a leg when the report comes out that he's returning, say, 3 weeks after the All-Star break, and everybody and their mother wants him back. Maybe you can get a jump on that. Not in my leagues, unless I turn around and drop him next week. We'll see. Injuries. I think that's it. Talk a little trade deadline. Also, hopefully get to some of your questions here. Trade deadline. I think the top one on my list is Indy. I don't know about you guys. I think that's been killing us all year. Rick Carlisle deciding that he wants to go small to – there's a great follow out of Indy, Caitlin Cooper. Really illustrated this well in an article. They're trying to negate the rebounding deficiency by going small. So they really like Aaron Nesmith. He has some truly explosive plays. That dunk over Jared Allen really highlighted how quick he gets up in the air. There's so much good to like there, but there's also quite a bit of bad. Shot selection, tempo, not really truly being able to shoot that well. So it's just interesting that they made that choice. Also, they have a guy like Buddy Hield. Is he a part of the long-term plans? All that Lakers trade stuff, it really stopped becoming relevant maybe even weeks before the season started. LA clearly wanted that to happen. Were they going to get that to happen? That was the operative question. Miles Turner's contract's a little bit weird. So it created a little bit less tradability Now, though the trade deadline is upon us, Indy has to decide, what do they want to be? Do they want to be a Miles Turner team for the rest of their 2-3 year period here? You've got an owner that likes to chase the 8 seed. That's just kind of a known fact. They're currently under Rick Carlisle. He does not want to lose games, I would imagine. It's not a great setup. You would think that they would not want to be a Miles Turner team. Well, I like a lot of what Miles Turner does. It's not a great upper tier team strategy because his offensive game, in my opinion, takes away from teammates. When he does well, there's not a trickle down effect to the other teammates. So when you see these big Miles Turner numbers, I don't think, I don't look at the Pacers and say, all right, this is going to make Buddy Hield better, and this is going to make Tyrese Halliburton even better, and this is going to make Aaron Nesmith even better. I think this is going to make Miles Turner's stats look better, and I think this is going to make Miles Turner feel better. Who knows? Maybe he continues to develop. Maybe he learned a little bit from Domantas Sabonis all those years, in terms of playmaking and this larger picture of what he could do offensively. Defensively, he certainly blocks shots. He certainly covers a lot of ground. Have I looked at Miles Turner's play defensively and said, oh, man, that guy's a defensive wizard? Haven't really gotten there yet with him. And I'm always skeptical as big men get older that razor thin edge of being able to defend at a high level out on the perimeter while also providing rim protection. That can go in an instant. He still has it, in my opinion, but will he have it a year from now? Will he have it 2 years from now? And then you have the omnipresent injury risk. If I'm Indy, I was out of the Miles Turner business a long time ago, especially when you both invested a decent pick in Isaiah Jackson, but you also signed Jalen Smith. You made a promise to Jalen Smith, I'm guessing, that he would start. That's not happening anymore. What's going on internally there? And really, if I'm Isaiah Jackson, I'm thinking, well, you guys don't think much of me because you're not investing even the basic amount of minutes in me. And this is a guy who, in the vertical screen game with a player like Tyrese Halliburton, can get you easy buckets over and over and over again, because the fact of the matter is you can't cover him that high in the air. So defensively, it really opens things up. You have to stay connected to him. So Halliburton, who is a kind of league best playmaker, also learning how to finish and finish at a high level. You just pick your poison. And what it does is it's the whole Rashawn Holmes in Sacramento thing. When he was hitting at a high level, the defense can't recover, and so these big time screeners who have good vertical game instincts, as Isaiah Jackson does. Now he's got some problems finishing, so he's not like a finished product. I don't want to go too far with that, but I thought the times that they let those two play, I thought they looked really good. Obviously that's not happening right now. The bottom line with this is that both players, Jalen Smith and Isaiah Jackson, I think Jackson way more so than Jalen Smith, because I think Jalen Smith's game, while there's some decent per minute pop there, I do think that it has holes and it has flaws and it can slide a whole lot faster than Isaiah Jackson, where Jackson just comes in the game, blocks a bunch of shots, gets you a bunch of steals, a bunch of dunks, high percentage stuff. I think the rebounding will come back when he's actually in the game and being asked to be a foundational rebounder. And a lot of times you're seeing him float out to the 3-point line, defending on the perimeter. If he's playing center or splitting at center and power forward, I think those rebounding numbers come back. 2 weeks ago, before the deadline, I don't think you can. You'd have to have some pretty good options to not at least want to look at that. And it's really hard when he's been in the G League, and the report now is that these two guys are switching the backup minutes, and that Rick Carlisle is going to play one of them based on feel. He played both of them the other night. I think he's just sort of talking right now. I think that it makes sense for Indy to put Miles Turner into as many minutes as they can. We'll just see what they ultimately decide to do. We'll find out in a couple weeks. But if they do get rid of Miles Turner and they don't bring a center back, I think 24 minutes for both of those guys, even if they don't play together, I think that's enough for both of them to have at least late round value. With Isaiah Jackson, the per minute upside is way beyond that. He could be a top 50 player in about 25, 26 minutes per game. So if they did that trade and you play Jalen Smith, who can shoot a little bit, he hasn't been able to shoot this year, probably due to confidence and tempo. If he gets into a rhythm, I think you can play those guys together, and that's probably their best odds strategy to win games if that's what they want to do. So we're looking at the deadline for those two players. San Antonio, a lot of people are wondering what to do with Jakob Poeltl. I don't see Zach Collins or we'll just say Charles Bassey, we'll go miscellaneous. I don't see either of those players as like, you got to go grab him before the deadline. Zach Collins has had so many chances to have fantasy value, and he's come up empty so many different times. Yes, there's the injuries. Yes, every now and then you'll see him have like 5 cash counting stats of 3-pointers, steals, blocks, and you'll go, hey, there's something there. Too many times we've seen it and it hasn't happened. Factor in the injury history and whether or not Popovich even wants him playing more than 25 minutes per game. I'm personally not going there. Bassey, he got a shot. It was really interesting there for a bit. He's got super long arms, good size, can block some shots, but too many times he gets overwhelmed by the size and physicality of the other team, rendering what he does well sometimes obsolete. So Bassey, while it was a great 30-team pickup for me, and at one point in time he had a 5-game week and I was loving it. It was just like a fill-in for me. Even then he didn't do that well. So I don't think there's anything with Charles Bassey. Charlotte, I did cover this in the Bruski Breakdown. If they get rid of Mason Plumlee, which they got to do it, I just don't know if they will. Charlotte seems to have a love affair with Mason Plumlee. I do think Plumlee has had good games this year, but he's exposable on defense to the extent that, like, if you saw Plumlee on the floor, you should run pick and roll at him until he's off the floor. If you felt like Mason Plumlee was a guy you didn't want on the floor. So he's beatable. Do teams do it? No. Are they concerned that Mason Plumlee's on the floor? Not really. His stats have been decent, good even at times. So they've really played their way into a good possible trade. And I hear locally Sacramento, nothing sourced or anything like that, but like in terms of a backup center who plays a little bit like a Domantas Sabonis, that could be a decent fit. So there's places he could go. What can Charlotte get? I think they should take whatever they can get. He's on an expiring deal, and he's not a part of your future. You had Nick Richards in the lineup, and he did a lot of things right, but unfortunately they did the old school coach thing of saying, I'm going to go with my vet, and I'm also going to mess with my rook or second-year player. I get it. It makes them tougher, but I also wonder how much it just steals from their development. So Nick Richards has been on the pine and, kind of back and forth a little bit. Now he and Mark Williams are sort of swapping minutes. It's trade deadline time. So we basically just have to operate with the assumption that Plumlee will get moved and that these guys probably split 24 minutes right down the middle the rest of the way, 24 and 24. What can Nick Richards do in 24 minutes? Interesting thing is it feels like they said, hey, go block some shots. Whereas during his stretch where, everybody was high on Nick Richards, is like he's really playing well. Clifford was out there saying the same exact thing. People were starting to get excited about Nick Richards. He couldn't block a shot to save his life. And I really think he was too scared to not play position defense. It feels like they've said, hey, go out there, block shots. So that's a totally different fantasy asset than the one that we saw prior to the deadline, which really didn't have much value. Top 175, top 200, really boring numbers, like 7-7, 8-8 with no defensive stats. That's not cutting it. But if he adds a block, a steal every once in a while, maybe get over the 1 block per game mark at 24 minutes per game, and you got the high percentages. And this is a guy that could be more than what he's been. He's a guy that he runs the rim really well in transition, offensive rebounding, one of the better offensive rebounders in the league. He could start piling up points if he played with a guy named LaMelo Ball, who hasn't played all year. A lot of easy buckets possibly there for him if they just cut the whole thing loose, tank, and let these young guys play. Mark Williams, a little bit more conventional big man game, more faith in him to get the steals and blocks that will power his fantasy value. I think both these guys, if you need a big man, as we cruise into the trade deadline, taking a chance on either of them, I think you got to do. I think Williams is the upside play. Nick Richards is the boring sort of top 100 play if he gets to 24 minutes per game. Let's go to Atlanta. John Collins is been on the block forever. I really don't. I don't think a bad team is trading for John Collins in that big contract. So it's like, what needle can be threaded somewhere else? Sacramento always comes up. I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think they kind of think that they're okay with where they're at. Everybody's kind of put a W on the board, and they just sort of they don't need to go any further. I personally think they need to do more to address their defense, but John Collins might not be the answer in that regard, though. The list of people that would be the answer is really, really small. He's an expensive option there, but he could go somewhere and I think see his value go down. That's the only real take I have on John Collins. And then the question would be, what happens if he goes, and what does Atlanta get in return? And I think the relevant point there, you might find guys like Bogdanovich, DeAndre Hunter level out and become a little bit more reliable in that late round range. And Yeka Kongwu typically only played center minutes. Could he play next to Capella? I don't know. But anything that removes shot blocking and scoring from the big man positions, I think would necessarily have to help Kongwu. And that's the one that we've been enjoying for the last couple of weeks with Capella out. He's intrigued in that sometimes he's at duds and sometimes he's at a nice stat set. We'll see what that looks like. But that's really all I see out of Atlanta, and especially not knowing what would come back. And then in Orlando, Bol, Mo Bamba. Mo Bamba's got to go, no matter what. I have a hard time seeing them want to deal somebody like Mo Wagner. Being Franz's brother, he's this borderline dirty, if not dirty player that goes around and acts as the enforcer. He's the brother of your star player. He's pretty versatile. I mean, I would want Mo Wagner on my team, in the capacity that he's in. Now, would I want to not develop Bol because I've got Mo Wagner on the team? Hell no. No, with Bol, it's basketball malpractice if you don't develop him as much as humanly possible, because players like this you don't see. We got one coming in the draft, Victor Wembanyama, who can do all these things that we've never seen really before. Is Bol at that level? No, he's not. But we don't know what he is. I mean, even just the way that he stands on the opposite side of the floor without making a single move, we don't really understand what that looks like to have a 7 foot whatever guy that, as an offensive player, I can't go there because he can get there faster than me. That's it. He can block my shot. That's shut off to me. I don't have that anymore. And he didn't even make a move. Offensively, this grab and go stuff, you get a guy that size going that speed, there's a certain point in time where you can't stop him. And 3-point shooting, how do you block that shot? Does he have miles to go in his game? Yeah, he really does. Some of the stuff, it's not as bad as it used to be, but yeah, does he know where to stand? No. Does he, get it right with floor balance? No. Does he take some shots he shouldn't take? No. But he also takes some shots that really it's a no, yes, but really it's not even a no. They can't stop it. So go do it. He's playing 20 minutes per game right now. I would, if I'm the Magic, develop him at the highest level possible. Am I saying give him 35 minutes a game? No. Am I saying give him 30 minutes a game? You don't even have to do that, but 28, 26, 24. I mean, figure out what you have there, because you might have the future of your team there. You don't need that. You don't need to figure that out with Mo Bamba. You know that he's not the future of the team. He can help another team as a backup big man who occasionally plays well. A lot of degradation in his game over the last couple of years after a promising start 2 years ago. Mo Bamba really has no future, so why not get an asset for him? Looking at the Jonathan Isaac stuff, yeah, it adds minutes that are going to be spent on him in the rotation, probably 15, 20, maybe even 25 at some point on an oscillating basis with whatever game's off. So to me, I would take those minutes from Mo Bamba, send him packing, and then figure out what am I going to do with Bol. Yeah, I could probably see something like 24, 24, 24, and 24 for Bol and Mo Wagner and Wendell Carter Jr. and Jonathan Isaac at some point would be the way I would approach it, just without getting too heavy into the details if I'm Orlando management. And as a fantasy GM, I'm asking myself, well, what can Bol be? Right now, he's at about top 90, 100, fading downward with questions about what will he do? What kind of minutes will he get going forward? I see why people are jumping ship. It looks bad. I even would go as far as to say some of that pristine per minute stat set stuff that's been the eye-popping stuff, in the part where you go, he can get you value. He can get you top 115 minutes per game. I'm seeing that stuff, and thinking maybe the per minute stuff is actually false. Maybe he's not as good as we, thought maybe he could be. But I think there's been a lot of zigzag. The COVID stuff was bad. Returning players, I think, didn't do him any favors. There was a point in time when he was getting 25, 26, 27 minutes per game. It was really fun opening up an Orlando Magic box score at that point and seeing what was it going to be. It was going to be something different every game. You could see 0 blocks one game and then get 5 the next, or 4 the next, or just a solid 3. 3-point shooting, he shoots well from the foul line. Generally an efficient player. There's a lot of ways that this thing can expand and do it in a much more valuable way. So, I mean, even if we say, look, he's going to get 18 minutes per game going forward, even if we say 18 minutes per game is only going to be valued at like 150, yeah, formats come into play here. Judge your team, judge your stat sets. What are you trying to accomplish? Where can you gain? All that stuff. But I don't think he goes beneath 150 at all. I don't think he goes beneath 125. I'm not even convinced he goes beneath 100. So with that, I think that's his floor. And I think a realistic upside scenario for him would be 75, 50 if it all goes well. Because, again, Wendell Carter Jr. never stays healthy, ever. And he's hurt kind of currently. And the All-Star break will help him out. Something to keep in mind. Jonathan Isaac. These guys, I mean, and the key, I think the one key that will unlock his upside, and I don't know that you want to wait until the deadline for this, is if the Magic do what they really got to do. And I say that because so many times you think they've got to do something and they just don't do it for whatever reason. Maybe the offers weren't there or whatnot, but they really got to get rid of Mo Bamba. And if they do that, I like the math with the 4 players, with the injury risk. And at that point, I think, don't wait until the trade deadline to try to acquire Bol in a deal, thinking buy low. If Bamba is traded, I think it will be more obvious to people, yeah, Bol has a better shot at hitting some of that upside. So, all right, that's the deadline talk. I don't know if Dan Bespris is still around, if he's got questions he wants to put up on the screen, or if he is doing whatever. I am still believing that Isaiah Jackson will have a top 60 run this season. Have you sold all your shares? No, I buy myself in denial. No, you're not by yourself in denial. I'm right there with you. It would just come down to, does he get the 20? If he gets the 24 minutes, absolutely top 60. 9 cat, 8 cat, he might fight on, one side or the other of the top 60 line. The thing we got to watch, though, is will they let Tyrese Halliburton run the offense that he wants to run? I'm sure if you went and asked Tyrese Halliburton, would you like a screen from Isaiah Jackson so he can roll and you can either shoot a layup or you can throw a lob, or if everything collapses altogether, you can pass the ball to Buddy Hield for a wide open 3? He'd be like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Or Miles Turner can go plop himself in the lane and ask for a post-entry pass. You make the call. I think top 60 is doable, even if they don't get it on offense, that you do have this sort of special, unique combination. And I'm not saying that Isaiah Jackson can finish all the time. That's been one of his big problems this year. A lot of times he gets the ball, he'll bring it down to his knees. He's not that strong, so he's not finishing through contact the way that he should be. But if they figure that piece out, that's where Jackson's, he can start hitting top 60 in like 22, 21 minutes, just based on the strength of those steals and blocks. Okay, Tamir asks, Clark versus Tillman. Is there any chance Tyus Jones getting more minutes due to Adams' injury? Tillman, he played really well against Sabonis. Nobody's stopped Sabonis all year. I get Kings fans that think I hate Domantas Sabonis, and it's just hilarious that if you don't talk extremely nicely about the Kings at every level, you're going to get hate. Sabonis has been just unstoppable this season to a ridiculous extent. I mean, watching him play offense is so enjoyable. Tillman shut him down. Tillman looks like he's lost 25, 30 pounds. I mean, he looked so like on his way out of the league late last year. I thought Tillman was going to be a good player. He looks great right now. I don't think that he's going to just be this explosive, can't miss fantasy ad. I would definitely add Brandon Clark ahead of him. That said, Taylor Jenkins does like to keep players in nice little buckets. Brandon Clark is one of those players. He does it with Tyus Jones. It was always Tyus Jones that would get the John Morant minutes and not DeAnthony Melton in the past. So I don't think Tyus Jones gets more minutes due to this. I think they stay in their buckets, and I think everything sort of works normally. I'm interested to see what this does to their offense. I don't see them running a ton of pick and roll with Xavier Tillman. Not that they can't. I just think that was a completely unique to Steven Adams. If you have Steven Adams on the floor, you want the other team guarding John Morant to have to feel Steven Adams over and over. Like, that's painful. It's punishment. Could Tillman do it? Maybe. Adams has this pact with the referees that he can just do whatever he wants. And nobody sets a screen like Steven Adams. And so I will go Clark all day over Tillman. Maybe I'd say 20% chance Tillman gets lucky and sort of outproduces him. But now Clark is the answer there. All right, what do we got next? Dano. This is the part where we see if Dano's listening to the show. Parker Finley, would you pick up Bog or Isaac Ninecat head-to-head? Well, if it's a situation where you can manage the games off, it's Isaac without a doubt. I don't think Bog, who might be Bull, if there was a typo there. But, Bogdan probably goes by Bog. I don't know. Isaac over Bogdanovich, I would say even in general. I'm just not a huge Bogdanovich guy. That knee situation might have improved with the recent work, but that's just been a thing. Like when everybody was screaming at the top of their lungs that they needed to keep him in Sacramento, it was like, guys, the knee, just point at the knee. You should see the knee at minimum before you get to any sort of basketball X's and O's stuff. So him not producing, him not being on the floor, him being a little bit under the cut line in a lot of leagues, this is just kind of not surprising at all. Isaac, if you were in a weekly situation where you can't manage the games off, I would probably say go for the healthy player. You'd have to have a pretty good roster and treat him like a luxury stash with the hopes that, hey, all this time off did work. He is healthy, and let that be, sort of the metric there. Now, if you're talking about Bull, I would absolutely rather have Bull than Jonathan Isaac. Blake Creamer, Kyle Lowry, is he good anymore? I have Kyle Lowry on an important team, and he's good. He's way more valuable than anybody thought he'd be on draft day. I think he's at like the 70 level in 8-cat right now. Is he good anymore? He knows how to play the game of basketball. I know, breaking news right there. He knows how to play the game of basketball, so he can get you numbers sort of independently of the fact that he's really not that good anymore. So I would project, he sort of is on a hell-bent mission, I think, to get the last amount of basketball he can get, out of his body. I don't think he wants to sit. I mean, they're going to sit him because it makes sense to sit a guy with his age and mileage down occasionally, but if they were taking that tack, they wouldn't be playing him the minutes he's playing. So he has some say in this. And I think he's just going to kind of plod his way along with, like, last night's stat line was something like 1 of 8 shooting, 5 rebounds, 7 assists, 1 steal. You know, just does that suck? Yeah. But every now and then he has a big one. And, you know, it's added up to like top 70 value in 8 cat leagues, probably not that much worse in 9 cat leagues. If he goes at that level, he's kind of this, I mean, he's like a top 60 guy if he keeps playing every game. So not good at basketball anymore. Pretty good as a fantasy asset, believe it or not. Roklarin. Sorry for that butchering. Would you consider trading Horford for Delon Wright? Ooh. All right. Horford for Delon Wright in 9 cat roto. Per game, they're similar value, and Delon seems to have the larger upside. I said it in the tweet storm. It feels like it's Delon Wright's year. It feels like they've literally told him, go out there, wreck shop, and he's efficient. So even if he gets a little bit more freedom on offense, I think that would just balance out. Maybe it would take away from his focus on stealing the ball. But it's like all the talent, it's sort of come together. He's at peak Delon Wright ability. Washington really doesn't have players that render what Delon Wright brings useless. That's been the case in the past. It's either been superstars, good players. You know, a lot of times Delon Wright's been hyped up and not hit the mark. Injuries, obviously, you know, play a factor. It seems like in Washington, they want him to be peak Delon Wright, and there's upside beyond that. I don't think Bradley Beal, I don't think he wants to go to the mat. I mean, this is a guy that's been big on games played and minutes played in the past, but they got a long time, you know, with Bradley Beal ahead of them, unless they can move him. That could be an intriguing storyline. I just don't see it. But I would, and I forgot the player that was on the other side of this equation. Yeah, Dano, you're so good. Have you considered being a producer? Horford. I don't think Horford's going away. I want to give Al Horford the credit that he deserves, both as a basketball player and as a fantasy asset. I think with the Robert Williams situation, it's sort of incumbent upon Al Horford to bring stability to the front court. Could they put other players in there? Possibly. But I think Horford is probably going to play a lot of games. So we are really gambling. If you take the Delon Wright side of this deal, you're gambling that not only does he keep producing at the level that he's producing, but he hits that extra gear. If he doesn't hit that extra gear, I don't think it works out for you. Yes. Let the big guy go. That's what I'm talking about. I got zero voice. Took my kid to preschool this week for the first time. He just straight up said, bye, Daddy. Didn't even care. He brought a cold home. Very first day. Yay, preschool. Thoughts on trading Turner for Mobley and CJ in 9 cat? Yes. Yes. And here's why. Yes, Turner could stay on Indy and he could be a top 30, 40 asset the rest of the way. He could also get traded to another team, be the third guy, resemble Turner versions from the past where he's in the top 50, 60 with all that injury risk. I think Evan Mobley has been just sitting on the back burner, waiting to sort of explode. They haven't really used him. You saw one of those games pop up the other night. You know, Mitchell and Garland, they are going to do what they're going to do. Jared Allen's going to do what he's going to do. So Mobley could easily stay in a top 60 gear all season long, but that's not his lane. This is an early round player, you know, top 30 player. You know, if one of those guys wasn't there, if they were leaning on Mobley in Cleveland the way that he could be leaned on, he's a top 30 guy. So whether that comes your way via injury, via Cleveland's like, hey, we want to step this guy up a little bit. You know, we've already shown that Donovan Mitchell can do what Donovan Mitchell does. We already shown what Darius Garland can do. You know, let's up Mobley. You would be winning on that alone. Plus, you get CJ in the deal. Yeah, I do this deal. All right. I see new viewers. This is Dan's putting stuff on the teleprompter for me. I see new viewers. Hit that like button and subscribe, even if Brew is rolling and forgets to tell you. What's that a reference to? My goodness. No, guys, seriously, this has been a lot of fun. Looking forward to doing it when I have an actual voice, but whatever, we survived the show. Very few hiccups. Shout out to Dan Vespris, who did this production, who was made the show so smooth, promoting it and such. Big thanks to all the people at Sports Ethos. Everybody's doing such a wonderful job. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, fans. Thank you, Fantasy Pass members, for putting a little coal in the engine, and we just keep rolling along here. Lots of big things coming up. Check out the trade deadline work being done. There's a link right on our main menu where you can find in the Today on Ethos, right at the top of the menu, Stephen Bigel's introduction to what they're doing on the trade deadline. We have 30 participants from around NBA Twitter doing a mock trade deadline. We have fantasy news, who to kind of stock up. We've talked about this here today in the show, but there's even deeper knowledge. There's shallow league knowledge for dynasty leagues, deep league info for you deep leaguers out there, and then regular old NBA stuff. We also have Major League Baseball. We did a meeting on that before this show coming up. So watch out for fantasy passers. You're going to get more stuff. And like we did with football, we're going to pilot it for you guys free this year. Joe Arico. Joe, if I'm butchering your name, my bad. This guy's a stud. He's going to be somebody in the industry. He's already doing great work. Keep an eye out for that stuff. I'm here for Brew Butchering NBA names. My bad, guys. Don't get me talking about Alperen Sengun. Dan told me that's just not right. Don't get me talking about Sengun. I'm going to offend some people out there who want to make sure the counting stats rule and defense never applies. You guys have a great day. We'll see you guys. Peace.